Thanks for tuning in to Stay Sharp with Razorleaf, your secret weapon for all things digital and products and manufacturing. In this episode, Jonathan and Jen welcome Michael Welti, who is our Managing Director for our Razorleaf UK office, to discuss the complexities of data migration, particularly in the context of Product Lifecycle Management. They explore the basics of migration, the importance of validation, and the role of user involvement in ensuring successful data transfer. Michael emphasizes the need for thorough analysis and cleansing of data before migration and for continuous improvement of processes post-migration. Jonathan concludes this episode with key takeaways for your next migration project.
Welcome back, everybody, to Stay Sharp, a podcast about all things digital-related products and manufacturing. I am Jen Ferrello, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Jonathan Scott.
Hello again, everybody.
It's been a while, but one of our earlier podcasts, I think back in the 30s, if anybody wants to go back and look it up after this.
The 1930s? We've been doing this that long?
No, we haven't been, definitely not.
Right. Just checking.
Number 30.
Okay.
Was about the difference between CAD migration and PLM migration. And it was something that I really struggled with given my professional background in CAD translation. We've had a lot of interesting discussions between that podcast and this one. And now we're finally circling back around to data migration again in the context of PLM. And we've invited Razorleaf's own Michael Welti as our guest today to help us navigate the topic a bit. Michael is the Director of Razorleaf UK. And Michael, maybe you can share a little bit with our listeners about your experience and your role here at Razorleaf.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be joining you. So my name is Michael Welti. I run Razorleaf in the UK. I've been working in PLM now for about 20 years. Primarily, I started as a researcher and doing kind of knowledge-based engineering, and then kind of developing more into the technical side of PLM. And in the last 10, 15 years, been a lot of focusing quite heavily on kind of PLM migration projects as people kind of move between different platforms.
So it sounds like you're exactly the right guy for us to be talking to then.
Michael is definitely the right guy on this topic.
Yes, I've had quite a lot of experience, yes. Kind of getting deep into the technical bits of it as well. So, yeah.
So we usually start off with some very basics. So, Jonathan, you want to start us off with, when we're talking about migration, what are we talking about?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the right place to begin. Like you said, Jen, we did an episode on PLM migration and CAD migration previously, but coming back to, I think PLM migration is our focus today. But what does that mean? Because that can mean a couple of things, right? So, just to orient us, Michael, here's how I would describe it, and tell me what you want to add to this.
Yep.
We're certainly, the context is you're moving from one PLM system to another, maybe, or PDM to PLM, or something like that, but moving from one system to another. But the real thing we want to dig into is moving that data, right? So it's the data migration from one place to another, or maybe from a couple of places to one target, something like that. But that's the idea, right? That's what we see most often. And that's the place where we get called in to talk about data migration most. Is that right?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's kind of two parts. Is how do we, particularly where companies, mergers and acquisitions, things like that, or the need to move to different platforms, they bring us in to work out how do they move their information from their old system into the new system. I mean, there's two parts of it, as you say. There's the actual data migration itself, and then there's the ability to actually kind of moving those people onto a new system as well. They're almost like two independent, completely different projects, as it were. One is how do you get the company involved and move them across and get people prepared for the new system, and the other side is how do you move the data across. The sort of conversations I usually get involved with more is how do I move the data across. But the other side is all equally important as well, and actually it's probably a completely different separate conversation, but just as important to get those two things going. But yeah, where we get to is how we move our data from our old system into our new platform. And usually it does come down to multiple systems. You've got different companies been doing different things in multiple little legacy applications. They want to move into their larger PLM platform, and it's taking all that data, merging it together, and putting it into the new system.
So for example, right, somebody's got a PDM with their CAD data in it, but maybe they've got some other kind of homegrown tool with the bill of material in it, or a change management process, or something like that.
Yeah, there's usually you've got kind of maybe the documents in one system, you've got a CAD in another, you're using an access data force or something old to handle your change process. Your bill of material might be in an old MRP system, and all those things have got to come together in a way that you can put it into the new PLM system in a way that everything connects together still. That's the aim of PLM, is to connect stuff together properly.
Yep. Okay, that makes sense, right? So it's not always a vanilla kind of, A for B, team center to Windchill, smart team to team centers, that kind of thing. Sometimes it is, the data's here, the data's there, it's scattered around, and I need to bring it all together. That's another sort of flavor of data migration.
Particularly when you start looking at the newer PLM platforms that are designed to be kind of global platforms for a company. Well, they might have had lots of individual kind of business units using one individual system. They want to bring it into the global platform. You've got to work out how to get each of those different sites and different kind of ways of working into that one PLM platform.
So I'm gonna stop you guys real quick, and I want to before we get into all of the different ways of doing this and how complicated it can get. We're supposed to be going back to the basics here. So vanilla gets a bad name because it's vanilla. Vanilla is actually a very rich flavor, and it's the basis for a lot of great creations. So let's start with system A to system B. And I agree that the data is different. Migrating the data is different than migrating the people. Michael, we've done a lot of podcasts on how difficult people are. So let's do the easy part, the vanilla data from system A to system B. Where are you guys? Where are we starting here? Jonathan, what's what's
vanilla?
Yeah,
vanilla. That's no fun. Oh no,
we're the base, and Michael's going to add all the toppings. So
so that's a good place to jump in, like you said, Jen. I think if we wanted to go with what most people think of as how do you do migration, right? And I think it's good that we've got Michael on, because we could talk about how the real world of doing this differs a little bit from kind of the expectation. But I think most people think of this 3-letter acronym when they think about migration. They think about ELT. So lots of IT folks listening to the episode are probably going to be familiar with this. Some folks may not be, but ELT is extraction, transformation, and loading, right? And so when you think about migration, that makes sense, right? You've got to get the data out of the source system, right? And this is our vanilla scenario, like you said. You've got to probably do something to it, because going to wherever it's going to land is different. That's the whole point, right? Yeah. Every one of these scenarios, even the complex ones Michael was just talking about, they're going to be different in some way or another. So you got to transform that data, and then you've got to get it in to that target system. So that ETL, I think that's a good baseline for us to start with. And let me just make sure, Michael, from your perspective, that's the fundamentals that you see?
That is the fundamental one of the traditional ELT, extract, transform, load. There's a couple of extra stages I would throw in to that as well, actually, particularly when PLM systems, and that is when you do the extraction, we tend to kind of pull the data out, but you actually want to do quite a lot of analysis on that data before you even do any transformation on it, to kind of validate what you've got, to make sure you actually understand the data correctly. So what we've tended to do recently is, instead of just doing extract, transform, load, is we would extract the data, we would stage that data in kind of a neutral system, as it were, and then perform some quite detailed analysis up front on it to really get a very good understanding of all the source data we've extracted, to make sure, one, do we fully understand it? Is there anything that's going to cause us problems as part of data migration? And the reason why we stage and do the analysis at that point is it's quite early in the process, you do at that point, but also PLM data, you're basically dealing with a lot of interrelated objects. And a lot of the problems you get with data migrations for PLM systems isn't how to handle individual bits of data and transform just individual bits of data, but how you do it in the context of all the objects it's related to. So that's why it's important to extract from your source system, stage it somewhere where you can do some really detailed analysis on it. So we've been kind of using NoSQL databases to kind of put into a system that we can run some very detailed analysis on the entire data set. So it's trying to do it in the context of the things that your data is working in, so you can see how the interrelated objects might affect how your migration works. So it's almost like extract, stage, analyze, and then that analyze then helps you work out exactly how you want to do the transformation. So we would then do the transformation to go from your source system format to the target system. So every PLM platform has got its own requirements. Your target system is going to dictate how your transformation is going to work. But they've all got their own different requirements and different ways of working. And it's taking that source data, really understanding what it is, transforming it into the format you need, and then loading it into your target system. And there's lots we could talk about loading systems. We can come back to that later. But so you load it into the target system, but then also there's a step afterwards as well, which is validation. And once you've loaded it, you really need to double check and ensure that one is, have you actually loaded everything you thought you'd done, and validating it so that you can try and relate that data you've loaded back to the source system data to kind of let you do like kind of full loop, as it were, to make sure that and be able to prove that what was in your source system is now in your target system, and everything you expected to be there is there.
Makes sense. Those are all steps that you talk about adding in there, right? That the staging, the analysis, the validation, right? So not just ETL, but a couple of other letters in the alphabet soup there that you need to do to be successful at this, right? So it's not just a purely technical, get it out, switch it over, move it in. There's a few more steps to it. That makes sense.
The few more steps. The whole kind of concept as PLM as being like objects and links and things related together. A lot of the problems you get with data migrations for PLM systems isn't just how to migrate one document or part. It's how you do that in the relationship to all the other things it relates to make sure those things are still kind of maintained as you go into the new system.
And I think that highlights, probably something that people can connect with regarding the language we talk about in this space today, right? So on the podcast, we talk about lots of things related to digital engineering and manufacturing, and digital thread comes up a lot. And really what I hear you saying, Michael, is you're not migrating necessarily PLM systems or the data between PLM systems. What you're doing is you're trying to rehome your digital thread. Yeah. You've got it sort of in one setup to start with, but you need to get it to a new place. And you're moving that whole thread, not just the little bits and pieces of data, but all those connections. And that's what makes it so tricky.
There's opportunities there too. So some companies, you actually have as part of the migration the ability to build up and enhance the thread as you're going along, particularly if you're going from multiple systems into one platform. It's an opportunity to then build the thread as it's being migrated in.
It's funny, it's been a while, Jonathan, since we've used like very simple examples on our podcast to demonstrate or to like basically illustrate an idea. As you guys are talking, I'm thinking about moving from one home to another, or moving from, like we're moving from this house and my daughter's moving from her apartment. We're all going to move to another. Like it's not just about getting the items from one place to another. It's like, okay, if you're going to do it right, you're going to put, which things do we want in which room? And we're going to put them all in that box. And then to make it easy, when we get there, we're going to unload it and unpack it, and it'll be in the right spot, rather than just trying to do it like when you all get there. It's we put everything in one truck and we delivered it.
Right.
And now we have.
I hope it works.
Right? Where is this? I don't in the truck. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that comes back to Michael's validate step, right? I mean, the moving example makes that one very clear. If you don't think about, did you get everything that you needed? Did it come across unbroken, or your dish is whole? That kind of thing. If you don't take that step, then maybe your move wasn't as successful as you thought. So that is an important step. I'm glad you mentioned that one.
Exactly. And also that analysis step at the start as well is where that kind of comes really key, is fully understanding in quite a lot of detail what you've got to start with, to then plan in which room should these things go into. Mm-hmm. Before you even start the migration, it's really understanding what you're kind of trying to migrate in terms of a lot of detail, and then planning out, say, right, here's all the things, where's it going to go to? What's the process they're going to use? How does it need to be transformed into the new system?
So I want to ask a leading question related to that, because this is something that I don't think you do when you're moving houses, but it's something that I know we do, and I see a number of people do. Do you just do this once? Is it like moving houses where you kind of get set up, you go through all the steps, you just do it one time?
No. So there you need to do it.
Yeah, that's a setup question. That's a setup question.
You need to do it as many times as possible, purely because you are the first few times you're just testing out maybe your migration process. Like, am I able to migrate our data? What's its performance like? Are we some migrations you need to have the ability to kind of complete over a weekend, or some migrations will cause downtime. You need to work out how to minimize that. So then you start working on, like, let's practice and try and improve the performance. Once you've got your migration process working, you've got it going at your speed, the next time might be to validate the data, provide it to the users so they can go and test and make sure, does what we've migrated match what you require, and also are you able to work with it moving forward? And so it's continuous iterations of the process to run through to make sure, and maybe in small chunks as well, to get things as quick as possible so people can you need to try and get the migrated data in front of the users, the people who understand it, as fast as possible so they can validate and say, yes, you're right, or actually, no, this doesn't quite. Because you're not just validating the data, but typically also you're validating, does the new business process we're envisaging work for what we've migrated?
Hold on. I want to stop you there. Because I knew you were going to go there when we talked about this a bit earlier about, well, is it data migration or is it system migration? There's this thing in the middle, right? Yeah. Which says, I give the example that I immediately know you're talking about, right? Is, all right, I moved the data over. I did the validation. All the bits and bytes are right compared to the source system. But wait a minute, when the user goes in to do something with it, right, check it out, work with that data, oh, wait, that doesn't behave like I thought it would. Yeah. Well, of course, the new system behaves differently than the old system. But when you put those two things together, right, because the users might have bought off that the new system's fine. I don't mind checking out that way. That works good for me. That's great. And they bought off that, the data looks fine. I moved it over. It looks the same as it did in the old system. You put those two things together, is it still okay?
Is it still okay? And as part of that validate process, I would always recommend that someone tries to revise and release this and change one of their migrated large assemblies, because that's usually something that gets missed off when people are doing kind of the solution side, they're testing, they're working that process. It's usually on small stuff. But actually, if you take one of your existing large things and try and, once it's migrated, validate to say, can I actually work with this moving forward? And that's the business side, I guess, the system side of the migration process. Can I use it once I've migrated it?
I think that's an important point, right? And we're hitting on a few things that are best practices, lessons learned, things like that. And Jen, I know we're at the end. We always do a good job of coming back to talk about those. We need to remember to talk about these because they're valuable points for people to think about when they're thinking about doing some of this themselves or how they're going to do it with a partner or whatever it might be. That's a real nugget there.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, I want to ask, Michael, what do you think, with all those steps you talked about earlier, what can people do themselves? What should they do themselves? What should they not do themselves? That kind of thing in the ETL, VESA, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, that stuff.
So I guess the customers know they know the data best. They are the people that understand their data the best. So helping kind of scope out the migration, particularly high, and also doing that analysis on the data to say, look, this is what you've got. They'll be the people to be able to say, well, the reason why we've got this sort of data is because of these reasons. And they also know where all of the skeletons in the cupboards are, as it were, of all their existing data they've kind of been working with for years. Knowing what that is and help to scope and frame that as part of the kind of migration process really does help. Knowing what the worst case scenarios are in their data is kind of a useful thing to start working on that. Analysis
and exposing it too, right?
And exposing it, and it's almost like owning up to it, I guess, is the hard bit, because admitting it, because it's kind of no one wants to expose the skeletons in the cupboard, but essentially, as part of the migration process, it's going to come out, and they need to be able to kind of.
Well, see, and I'm going back to like my moving analogy, right? So when you're packing up, we've moved several times. When you're packing up, you are the right person to determine, okay, you know what? This stuff I need to take, definitely need to take. That stuff I need to take, but I don't need to access. So I'm just going to put it, that one goes in the basement or the attic or what have you. This stuff, we can get rid of that. We can give that to somebody else. We can throw it out of the trash. That's part of the process, right?
That is true. Totally. And that's getting involved in that is really kind of key and useful. I guess next thing is the transformation part. as you're kind of going from the source system to the target system, some of the transformation will be dictated by the target system itself. There's going to be, you have no choice. This is how this needs to transform. But for instance, mapping of attributes and values and all that sort of stuff, where the kind of customer understands it best, particularly where they've added in additional things to their source system and they're adding it to the target system, that sort of mapping where it's not the mandatory fields, but it's the other bits of data. Getting involved in that process is quite key. And if they've got in their source system where they've got kind of particular data models or things they do particularly well in their source system, they want to kind of maintain, they'll be kind of key in working out how to transform that to the new system, not just from a data migration point of view, but again, that system point of view as well, of working out how is it going to work in the new system and targeting the two. Could you get the customers to do it themselves? You tend to need quite good tools to do the transformation. And so that's kind of where kind of typical partners and technologies come into it, because you're usually dealing with quite large data sets, but helping kind of control and run that process is kind of good. When you can get the customer involved to actually run the migration process, so we can set it up and say, right, you can go and execute it, and particularly if it's a long running process, that can be quite a useful thing. And monitoring and tracking the process.
So sort of watching and supervising the movers, as it were?
Yeah.
No, not there.
Keep an eye, making sure things are moving along nicely, making sure all the boxes come out of the house nicely and everyone's taken care, and the general underlying systems are running typically, because also usually these migration processes are running on the customer's IT system and infrastructure. And obviously they are the ones that maintain that the best and can help with that. So that's quite a good place to get them involved.
And maybe that's a good differentiation to make there, right? I mean, I ask the question generally as, what can the consultants do versus what should the customer do, that kind of thing. And maybe it should be differentiated more than that. It's sort of the technical folks, experts at certain pieces. That's really differentiation, because you might have that knowledge in-house.
Yeah.
It might not be consultant and customer, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there's the technical side, IT, there's the business, and each one's got a role to play in it, I guess, as part of that. The loading depends on what target system you're going to and how what are the requirements for it. Some of them have got quite specific requirements how to load that data, which tends to need quite specialist tools to do that. Some PLM systems are quite simple, and so you can get involved with that. And it also depends on what sort of technical resource you've got available to do that work. Where it gets really the biggest area and the most important for getting involved is the validation part. That is kind of the key bit, is kind of helping get them to validate, improve, and help make sure that you provide enough details and tools and techniques and reports so they can be confident that you've migrated the data correctly, but it matches what they're expecting, and kind of validating that process. And
it's much like the scoping piece, I think, right? That you need to be an expert in the data to do that well, right? Because people can help you. Like, I can open somebody else's box of dishes and tell whether it's broken or not, but I can't tell whether great-grandma Jane's spoon is missing.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's a very good analogy.
So it's getting the people who understand the source data to look at the target data. Not just kind of the IT kind of the PLM lead team, but also it's the people who understand the data itself. Getting them involved in that validation process is kind of key, because you want to make sure that they are comfortable and happy that they've got what they're expecting and can use it once it's been kind of available, released them to use. And that's part of that validation exercise.
So I want to talk about something that we have not mentioned explicitly. I think you touched on it when we were kind of going through our alphabet soup earlier. But what about in the process? This is like your moving analogy, Jen, when you mentioned, cleaning a few things up and deciding a few things maybe should go to charity, a few things should go to the trash bin, that kind of thing. Where does that step fit, and how important is that, Michael?
So when you're doing that analysis stage, as it were, for instance, there's going to be, tend to at that point find kind of essentially all the skeletons in the cupboard. You might say, well, actually, here's the things, and then getting them involved in that to say, well, actually, these things we don't need, or these things we'll go and fix before doing the migration. So you might go and clean up the data. So what you might, for instance, you might find things that have got where you've got legacy data where it doesn't match your kind of the way your company works or the kind of policies or the requirements of the target system. So sequences are out of date, or you've got kind of in-work things, release things that can't make logical sense in the target system. So doing those things before you migrate it tends to be a lot easier than doing it after you've migrated it. And sometimes actually you can't. They are data that you can't actually migrate because the structure won't fit.
Right.
So getting involved at that point to say, right, well, are we going to clean this up? Are we going to change it? Or are we going to exclude it from the migration scope? And so that data cleansing and kind of deciding on what data to migrate is kind of key and important.
That's one of those. Yeah, go ahead, Jen. Sorry.
No, I was going to ask you, like, we've spent a lot of time in previous podcasts talking about the character of the data, understanding the relationships, et cetera. Does that play a role in all of this from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does. I'm very interested to hear Michael's take on that. I think it's critical to understand the nature of your data, both where it's coming from and where it's going to, because that really influences a lot of that business decision that Michael talked about that the customer has to be very involved in, the person who's the user of the system. Because if, you can have unreasonable expectations and you can also lose things that might be valuable to you if it's sort of all, it's all Greek to you, you don't understand it, and you say, well, sure, just bring it over, right? Well, wait, what kind of detail did I lose in the process? Or do I think, well, of course it's going to behave right, when it's like, well, you don't have any of that data today. Sorry, I can't make it up for you.
Yeah, sorry. So the character of that data is kind of really key. It's not where it's also, I guess it's the two types of characters. There's the character of what it currently is in the source system and the character of what it's going to be in the target system. And, and making sure you're happy with both those two characters, because essentially they could be quite wildly different, not just in kind of how the data is represented, but again in kind of the level of granularity in the two sides could be kind of wildly different too, and also how you use them moving forward.
Yeah.
Well, and
absolutely.
how they behave, right? I mean,
exactly. And what there is there. And I said, you can't make up data where it doesn't exist, but that's not even true all the time, right? I've seen plenty of data migrations where, look, all I've got is these files, and I'm just going to move these files over because I used to track these files on a file system. But I've seen people extract data, pull data out of, to build metadata in the new system. And so there are things you can do, but it's understanding that is critical, right? It's, if you understand it, you can get the outcome that you want. If you ignore it and don't kind of dig into it, you may not get as much value out of it.
Exactly. So it's understanding the character of where you're going to, because that will dictate and define. You've got certain requirements you've got to meet. So if you're loading from a file system into a PLM system, you might need to go and say, well, I've got like a whole list of mandatory metadata. We need to go and calculate somehow to be able to put that in, kind of like titles, descriptions, states, all that sort of stuff that might be tricky to interpret from just a file system, but combine it with other bits of data. This is usually where combining multiple systems, multiple sources of information together comes in, because you're trying to meet the requirements of the target system as you're migrating in. So going from a file system and maybe like a drawing register document or database or something, merge those together so you can then get it into the target system in a way that kind of meets the target system's requirements as well.
It's not just data cleansing, it's almost data enhancing as well.
Yeah, this is that place where I don't think you can underestimate the teams working together, right? And shifting off of that, customer consultant mentality, but that different skill sets, that different levels of expertise, right? So folks with the technical view who say what's possible, folks with the experience view who say, oh, I've done migrations a ton of times and I've seen these patterns, these are things to think about. And then folks with the business view who say, here's what I've got and here's what I want, right? And when they're all at the table, suddenly you get the best outcome instead of just looking at it as a technical exercise or looking at it as just a, hey, give me what I had exercise. I think that's a lot of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, it's that multifaceted kind of thing. It does, if you want to have because it's not really the success isn't necessarily a completed data migration. It's the month afterwards when they've successfully worked with the migrated data for a period of time. And it's keeping those people happy and making sure they're involved in the whole process. It's kind of key.
I think that's a key point. It's not just, okay, it's the data's in there. It's, are you using it? Not just have the first couple weeks gone by, but it's 6 months later, 12 months later. Are you using it the way you thought you were going to be using it? Are you comfortable? And like, have you not lost things along the way that you didn't even think that you needed, but as it turns out, you really did?
So I want to take a stab, Jen, because I know we're coming to the end of time, and I want to beat you to that punch. I never do. I never do. But finally, I remember.
You're never the voice of reason.
I've never. But I'm thinking of what the nuggets are, right? And I'm going back to the conversation and the things that I heard that I want to touch on. And then I want, Michael, you to add what we missed here is rehearsal's important. You don't do this just once. You need to do it in a repeated way. I also heard that validation is important. Don't get stuck on ELT. Oh, that's all it is. It's just ELT. Don't forget the V at the end. And there are a couple other steps you added in there too. But checking it, that's important. I think the other thing that I'm also hearing is make sure that you're thinking about the use of the data, not just is the data right? So those are the couple of nuggets I heard, but I know I missed some. What else?
I guess analysis, really understand before you even start doing the transfer and load and migration bit, analyze the source data in enough detail as an entire data set to make sure it all matches together so you understand fully what you want to migrate in enough granularity and do it as a whole so it's all the bits connected together so you can see the patterns of how the related thing objects work together. Validate, make sure it's working, check it afterwards, and get the users who are going to use it to be part of that validation process as early as possible so they can try and use the migration. Not just look at the migration and say, the data's there, but actually try and get to use it a few times so you can actually use it moving forward.
Kind of cook in the kitchen, so to speak. Not just look in the cupboards. Actually do something.
Actually do something, yeah.
Well, thank you both for a great summary. And like we always, or not always, but often end, Jonathan, I feel like there's so much more that we can talk about here. I mean, it was very good, very basic, very vanilla, very rich in flavor. But I think there are some toppings to dig into next time. Things like how to handle some of the mappings, the real details, revision history, how much to bring over, linked files, records, relationships, etc. So, Michael, I think we're going to need to have you back at some point and continue this discussion. So I want to thank you for joining us today. And thank you, Jonathan, for being a great co-host as always. And
you're welcome.
And it was a great summary. Thank you for beating me to the punch on that.
One time.
And to thank our listeners for being there. And matter of fact, to encourage you again to reach out. If we're going to have some more conversations about data migration, PLM migration, tell us what haven't you heard in this? What are some topics that you want us to talk about, some questions that you have? This is part of a conversation. It's more interesting if you're in it. So please reach out to us via social media. We'd love to hear from you. And until next time, everybody, stay sharp.
Thank you for being here and listening to this episode of Stay Sharp with Razorleaf. If you have any questions or comments on this episode, please leave us a comment on our post or send us an email to podcast@razorleaf.com. And if you like this podcast, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform or on our YouTube channel. Until next time, stay sharp.